an organization set up a number of years ago to disseminate Theosophy, the ancient wisdom, the ancient philosophy. In Greek, Theosophia, divine wisdom. It's been known by many names, but it speaks of the truth which lies within and is described in various religions and other systems of thought. Now, if any of you are here for the very first time this evening and have not received a questionnaire or have not yet filled it in, before you do leave, if you would kindly do just that, which helps us plan future publicity, as we spend about £10,000 a year in conventional media, and we like to know what works and what doesn't, so we can shift our budget accordingly. Now, tonight's speaker is no stranger to these shores, nor to this platform, Yiannis Pittis. In fact, the subject of study this evening is very close to his heart, as he is a Greek. And he has been delving into these matters from a very early age, and he currently leads a group on the Kabbalah, which has been holding meetings in this building for the last 2 years consecutively. Yiannis is an expert on this subject. He also has given courses on tarot, and he is the co-founder of the Philalethia School of Esoteric Philosophy, which has branches both in London and throughout continental Europe. Tonight, the subject of his talk is the good, true, and beautiful in Greek philosophy. It's with great pleasure I give you Yiannis Pittis.
Thank you, Colin. Good evening, all. And with that kind of introduction, I hope that you will not be disappointed. Certainly, I don't claim to be an expert, nor do I claim that what I would speak of today is anything other than a representation of the truths that those great minds delved into and wrote out of the mysteries of life. Let us begin this evening by actually explaining the word philosophy, as it is the Greek philosophy that we will speak about in the terms of the good, the beautiful, and the true. In the English dictionary, it says that it is actually a discipline by which someone comes to understand the beliefs and concepts of other people. But for the Greeks, philosophy was something much, much more and far more all-encompassing. The word etymologically means the love of wisdom. And wisdom for the Greeks was not how it is actually perceived today. It was an all-encompassing term of science as well as art. So therefore, the ancient Greek philosophers who wrote out of the mysteries of life the wisdom and then endeavored to present it in comprehensible terms were at the same time scientists who studied the natural laws, who studied the divine, who studied man, who studied the cosmos, the universe. And in all their attempts, they endeavored to bring out of their research and their studies certain principles, certain universal laws by which they can then demonstrate the validity of what they actually said and what they had discovered. Therefore, let us begin with this principle that they came to find and also pervaded throughout their period all and everything they had discovered. It is the principle of three, the principle of the divine Trinity, which pervades the universe, pervades man, and also pervades the whole of everything that we might term life. This principle of three also is very predominant in the actual age that we know as the great golden years of Greek philosophy, which started approximately 585 BC and ended approximately 529 AD. And this period of approximately 1,000 years was also divided into three great sections. And each section had also its three subdivisions. So you can see that the principle of three flowed throughout all that the Greek philosophy contained and advocated. The first great period, which was from 585 to approximately 400 BC, was known as the period of the Socratic and pre-Socratics. Of course, this is a term that does not encompass the great names that actually fall into that category, such as Heraclitus, Thales, Anaximanes, Anaxagoras, and all other great names like Zeno and so on. these are only but a few names. That period was a great period, not only in the Greek history, but also in other parts of the world. Great names had actually manifested and endeavored to reveal another gem of the divine wisdom. And so this great period also were divided into three, as we have said. In the first part, we have the venturous and bold years, where a lot of creative thinking was necessary, a lot of delving into the whole universe and asking very pertinent questions about all and everything that pertained to the cosmos. And then after that came the period of where there was a lot of critical and logical inquiry, not only a bold and adventurous kind of inquiry. Everything had to make sense and everything had to stand to logic. And the third period was the years of reconciliation, where they endeavored to actually take account of the synthesis between the critical and the skeptical, as well as the adventurous and the bold. In the second great period, we have what is known as the Platonic years, but of course there again we have Aristotle and many other philosophers who gave their richness to the world. But generally it is known as the Platonic period. In that period, great schools were actually established, and during those schools they endeavored to educate man about the physical nature of life, about the emotional or moral aspect of life, as well as the logical and intellectual aspect of life. Once again, we see this principle of three in what the schools of that time taught mankind. They endeavored to educate the volitional, the intellectual, as well as the moral and emotional nature of man. And thus there was a holistic approach to everything that they actually gave out to the world. Certainly, the later period, which is known as the Neoplatonists, it's a very long period, and it started from about 100 BC and ended about 529 AD, when Justinian actually banned any kind of teaching of the old days. During that long period, all the philosophers, such as Philo, such as Porphyr and Plotinus, who are great names in themselves, endeavored to actually synthesize, integrate, unify the findings of their predecessors and put them in cohesive terms. And it is no surprise that they have chosen the words the good and the beautiful and the true, under which they are writing great theses in respect of what their predecessors have said, as well as what they had found to be the true, the beautiful, and the good. And thus, it is of no surprise that they, in all their commentaries, as that period is known as the period of commentaries, they endeavored not only to discover what was current, but also to synthesize and not deny what was previous. In that period, there was also the Christian influence, and therefore there is some of the Christian flavor in all the Neoplatonists as well, and the Gnostics and so on. However, it is a period of 1,000 years that we would try to cover today. And of course, that is a very mean feast for anybody, no matter how good orator he actually is. So let us be content perhaps with a very broad outline of what those 1,000 years had covered, and not attempt, as we will fail, to really in depth go into that period. For those great names and all that they had to say is far too deep and far too much to only give it in a sense of a very peripheral kind of attitude. Therefore, let us try to begin with the nature of the beautiful, and the reason for that is that in my experience, through researching the various different aspects of the teachings of the ancients, not only the Greek but also the Indian, the ancient Egyptian and so on, I found out that really in each great period there is a certain spirit, there is a certain quality of a spirit, there is a certain flavor that moved and inspired the people to embody in themselves certain qualities of the divine. And if we were to say that the Egyptian period that preceded the Greek was the great age where the spirit of religious magic actually moved, inspired, and caused all and everything, the arts, the sciences that we find in the Egyptian history, then if we look at the period after the Greeks, which were the Roman period, we will find that the spirit that moved the Romans was the spirit of conquest and order. And if that is the case for the Romans, and the spirit of the age of the Egyptians was religion and magic, then certainly we would say that the spirit of the age of the Greek period was that divine spirit of philosophy and beauty. And so in honor of the fact that beauty and philosophy was the spirit that inspired the Greeks, we shall begin today by highlighting some aspects of what the Greeks had to say about the beautiful. Now, Plato, who certainly is not a name that would be unfamiliar to you, is a philosopher of a great, deep, and penetrating insight in all manner of subject matters. For as I said, the ancient Greek philosophers were scientists and artists, and the present day, many different sciences and arts, by the names of psychology, philosophy, by the names of the physicists, the mathematicians, and the astronomers, and so on, they were all covered under this mantle of philosophy. So Plato, in respect of the beautiful, says that it is not only enough to look at the outer form and the physical beauty, but we must go beyond and begin to appreciate the moral beauty. We must go beyond even that moral beauty and begin to appreciate the beauty of the intellect, the children of the intellect, which are the beauties of form, the beauties of ideas. And beyond that, there is also the spiritual beauty. And beyond that spiritual beauty, Plato states, is that eternal, ineffable, that beauty which is the source of all and every other beauty. And therefore, the counsel from Plato, it is, let us not only focus our attention on the appearance, for the appearance is only a symbol that veils the hidden mystery of the all-divine beauty of the eternal. Pythagoras, which was before him, also highlighted the beauty of mathematics, the beauty of numbers, stating that really the whole universe, the whole cosmos, actually was founded upon that exactness that numbers offers as a science. For it is, we might say, the only exact science, the science of numbers and mathematics. And so the beauty of music, the music of the spheres, the beauty of numbers was also highlighted by Pythagoras. He said it is not enough to only look at the forms, to look at motion, to look at the beauty of ideas, to look at the beauty of the shape and geometry of the heavenly bodies, but we must go deeper, much, much deeper, and there where the eternal abides, actually come to behold the beauty of the one, that is all-encompassing, unifying, synthesizing, and certainly in all the teachings of the ancient philosophers of Greece, certainly of the first period, where they focused their attention more on the universal, they would highlight that the beauty of the harmony in the universe was certainly a beauty by which man should harmonize himself, and by which man's actions, if they are to be beautiful, should also be measured. Plotinus, who was the student of Plato, a very great philosopher in his own right, in the Aeneans, which is basically a theme of writings and theses which he wrote, somewhat about 54 different subject matters, which he did not give specific titles, but his students and those who actually studied them subsequently gave them one or other title. And when he wrote on the beautiful, and it's a beautiful thesis which I suggest to all of you, if you want to know more about the beautiful and all that Plotinus had actually synthesized from the ancients in respect of it, that you read the Aeneans, and I believe is the 6th Aeneid, on the beautiful. Plotinus stated that beauty really is real being, and anything and everything that does not contain real being, and it is not pure in its beingness, then certainly it is not beauty. He stated that if we take the example of gold, when it is actually pure and unmixed by other materials, then it shines, glimmers, and reflects the light, and certainly it is that which can be said that is beauty for the soul. When the soul is unmixed by impurities, when the soul is actually pure and has real being, he states that is beauty. Certainly the soul of all and everything, not only the soul of man, but the soul of every other living thing is beautiful. And Plotinus goes on to say that that which truly elevates the soul of man, that indeed is beautiful. And that which exalts and expands the emotions of man, where the affection goes forth to unite with every living thing, then certainly any aspect of beauty that does that, then that indeed is real beauty. And during those periods, certainly the art, the sculpture, the oratory, and all and everything was pervaded by that spirit of beauty. For the ancient Greeks, beauty was a consummation of their aspirational nature, in which they sense the splendor of happiness, which actually leaped out of them in moments of rapture when they discovered an aspect of the divine. And so beauty is not only in art, beauty is not only in the song of a bird, beauty is not only in the outer form of a beautiful face or a beautiful body, but rather we must go beyond it, the ancient Greek counselors, and see what is the living being behind the outer form. Socrates also would speak about the beauty of virtue, whose goal is righteousness and joy. The Epicurean said he is a true philosopher who actually lives throughout his terrestrial life in a way that is beautiful and joyful. And therefore, for them, beauty was an essential quality that pervaded all aspects of their life. Let us ask the question, is there ideal beauty? Is there real beauty? Is there really a means and a way by which a human being may attain that ineffable beauty that Plato spoke of, that is beyond even the spiritual beauty? Is there a means by which we may behold the beauty of a virtuous soul? How are we going to do that? As we have seen the ancients counsel us to be joyful. They say that it is actually our duty. The duty of man, it is to be joyful and it is to be happy. But for some reason, when we study apparently important subject matters, we have long faces. We become very serious. We become rather, our face begins to tighten and tense. And so joy is an essential quality that springs out of beauty, and beauty liberates joy, and joy beautifies our lives, and joy is an enlivening energy. Joy is certainly expansive. Joy certainly prolongs the life of anyone. Joy is indeed something that if you breathe, sleep, eat, and wake up with and go to sleep with, could definitely make your life a beautifying expression. And certainly he who endeavors to beautify the world for others is indeed one who will have much joy in his world and in his life. For if you do not have joy, the ancients would say, in your life, you cannot for very long make other people joyful. Certainly, it is an essential part of living a life of happiness. Democritus will also say that really the beauty that we appreciate through the medium of the senses is only a very shadow of the actual real beauty that is possible for man to touch, to experience. So Plotinus asks, by what means are we to actually grasp or enter into the realm of beauty? And in his attempt to answer, he would say, it is absolutely necessary that we are not caught by the beauties of the body, by the beauties of form which we actually admired perhaps in the past, but we move far deeper into the very essence of our being, into the very essence of our soul. It is there, he would say, that possibly beauty can be realized. And he who attempts to rush after corporeal beauty, it is like the mythical figure of Narcissus who sees the reflection of his beautiful face in the water and rushes towards it. And Plotinus counsels us and says, he who actually rushes after corporeal beauty not only submerges his physical body into the darkness, but his very soul actually is submerged and therefore will converse, he says, in the here and after with shadows. So his counsel is a very strong and a very powerful message that highlights for us that it is necessary constantly to ask the question beyond the appearance and go deeper beyond the form, beyond even the moral and intellectual beauties. He would say such statements as, for he who would truly enter the meaning and essence of beauty, he must arise, go beyond the outer, go beyond his physical needs, go beyond his moral and intellectual needs, and there endeavor to behold the purity of right temperament. And in that purity, when the light encompasses his whole nature, then he must go even further and beyond that to actually experience the beauty of the eternal. Furthermore, he counsels us that it is necessary, just like in the Homer story and poem about Odysseus, that we must not allow ourselves to be grasped by the pleasures and beauties of the senses, for they powerfully will always entice us in one direction or another. And Odysseus, who was surrounded by Ceres and Calypso, which are symbols of the pleasures of the senses, certainly endeavored to turn his attention away from them and deeper into his very being and arrive at his beloved land of Ithaca, which symbolically represents the most deeper spiritual aspect of life. And this father's land, in all myths throughout the world, it is known as the El Dorado land, or as Ithaca land, or as any other particular promised land for the Christians and the Jews and so on. Always symbolically, the mystery of covering and embodying in the ancient scriptures the mysteries of life was done by taking certain actual historical figures and certain actual historical events and then arranging with them as symbols various mysteries and various suggestions and teachings about the way to spiritual realization and the way to spiritual unity with the beauty, with the goodness, and with the true of life. Yes, please. So, how are we to actually behold the virtue of beauty? For it is a virtue. Socrates advocates that it is indeed a virtue to beautify your life, to beautify your emotions, to beautify your thoughts, to beautify your actions. And Plotinus once again counsels and states, we must begin perhaps first of all by admiring the beautiful creations of art and the beautiful music and the beautiful things that we actually see. Then go beyond that and endeavor to appreciate the beautiful works that any man may do. And then not only stay there, but actually endeavor to contemplate upon the souls of those men who do beautiful works. And thus, often is the way, not only from the Greek philosophers, but also from other great men who are known as initiates and great teachers and masters, who advocate that if you want to actually attain a certain quality, then it is necessary that you meditate and find out all that is involved in it, then endeavor perhaps to emulate one who already is a radiant man or woman of that quality, and then emulate and endeavor to manifest that quality in your everyday life. And it is certainly a very effective method by which we may endeavor to manifest in our own world the qualities which we admire in others. So for the Greeks, this was a very, very simple message and a very simple lesson. And therefore, their myths and their whole history is filled with great heroes. For they understood that if there are great heroes that manifested beautiful and great works, then certainly the people that will read about them, that will study them, will also endeavor to emulate them. And so it begs the question, who are the heroes of our current age? What kind of heroes are they, and what kind of heroes are we emulating or endeavoring to manifest? It begs the question, what kind of heroes do we offer our children in our schools, in our education? It begs the question, why is it that we do not prepare them to live a moral and ethical life? Why is it that we only create for them circumstances in which they learn how to use their intellect, but not learn how to use their will to do the good, not learn how to actually express their emotions in such a way that they beautify the atmosphere around them, they beautify their relationships with each other, and so on and so on. For that was something that was essential in the teachings of the ancients, not only of the Greeks, I might say, but also of the Egyptians and the Romans and the Indians, the Buddhists, and so on. So it is essential for us to realize that in the study of the Greek philosophy, it is not only from an intellectual and academic standpoint that we should approach it, but rather endeavor to enter within the spirit of the mind of the Greek philosopher, who was a man of spiritual quality, a man of spiritual endeavor, a man of religious, if I might say, endeavor. It is so often, what a surprise for me, when I see, as an example, in the medical world, people take the oath of the medical profession upon Hippocrates, and they call him the father of all medicine. But they actually do not realize and do not manifest in their lives the qualities of Hippocrates, which indeed he was not only a medical man, but he was a priest healer, a priest medical man. He certainly did not divide and separate himself from the religion and from all that the religious teaching actually embody in all that he discovered in terms of medicine, in terms of healing. And so it is essential for our doctors today to also appreciate that aspect of life too, and not divorce their actual manifestation of their art or their science separate from their inner spiritual life. For whenever there is a separateness and a divorce between the inner and the outer, then always there will be a degree of degeneration, there will be a degree of dilution and impurity that will move into it. Whether that is in education, whether it is in science, whether it is in poetry, in art, and we often see examples of art where certainly the inner beauty is very much absent from the outer form that the artist is actually creating. We see the dark arts and so on. So it is essential to realize that the ancient Greek philosopher, as far as beauty was concerned for him, it was a matter of living realization and not only an outer appreciation. Plotinus would advise us and say, he who would wish to attain inner beauty then must begin to enter within the very sanctuary of himself and withdraw from the outer forms right into his very inner center. And there, if he cannot behold himself beautiful, then he must do exactly what the great sculptor does, where he has a beautiful form in his mind, but then he chips away constantly all that does not belong to that beautiful face until the outer form is exactly a reflection of that inner reality which he beholds in himself. And we must also, he counsels us, do the same insofar as our character is concerned. We must begin to actually break down all the impurities in it. We must straighten all that is actually crooked. We must actually harmonize all that is in conflict. And only then, he says, it is possible that we may then attain that purity and then go even beyond that purity For when we are in essence of our own soul, then we need no longer any guide, Plotinus states. Then we must take courage and go further deeply into the very mystery of that one who is beyond the beautiful, beyond the intellectual. He says that really it is necessary for one to realize when he begins that first he probably will appreciate the physical beauties. Then he would appreciate some of the moral beauties. Then he would appreciate some of the intellectual beauties. But indeed, it is only when he goes beyond that and sees that beyond the intellectual beauty is that which is the source of all and everything. And he calls that the good. And he says that it is the good that is the source of all other beauty, whether intellectual, whether moral, whether physical, of any kind. And he advises that there is where we might begin our way of appreciating beauty. First, by refining our character, then simultaneously as doing that, see and acknowledge those who already have manifested beautiful works and good works, and endeavor to emulate and enter in the meaning of beholding the soul of such virtuous and beautifying human beings who have existed, who are existing, who still are amongst us. It is impossible for a human being completely on his own without the benefit and the sharing that comes from those who have traveled before him to actually go forward. There are many arguments in the ancient Greek philosophers, and we will come to that when we deal with the subject matter of the true, where some of them speak of only an individual effort and others speak of a group effort, and all that philosophy of the group activity and the philosophy of the individual activity pertains. So let us now say a few things about the good. Plotinus and Philo, who endeavored to synthesize their predecessors' ideas about the good and about the beautiful, came to realize that all that they spoke about the good referred to the one absolute, ineffable source of all life, which we might give the name of God. And they would both say that the good is like a stream, a source which from it all and everything is actually created. Plotinus will go even further and say that really it is not the good that creates, but it is the emanations from the good that create. And in that way he endeavored to synthesize those who were the monists of the times and those who believed in polytheism. For you know that in the ancient Greek period, a lot of the religious inclination was to believe in many, many gods, which was obviously quite exciting for them because they didn't have only one god, they had many gods. But, however, there were those who also were deeply monist and indeed believed only in the oneness of the absolute, the infinite God. Such as Xenophanes, who would very often take argument with all those who believed in many gods, and he would say such things as, if oxen and horses and lions had hands and they were taught how to paint, then they will paint gods that had the shape of oxen, of horses, and of lions. And in that way he endeavored to actually neutralize the blind belief in the many gods that the people of the times actually had. Xenophanes certainly was a very great philosopher, just as Heraclitus was a great philosopher. We are all too often lend our attention to the more popular names such as Plato, Pythagoras, and Aristotle. But there were so many other great philosophers who had so much of value to say. Certainly Democritus was a great philosopher. Xenophanes, Thales, Anaxagoras, they all had much to say about the universe, much to say about man, about the truth, about the way to discover the truth, the way to discover the beautiful, the way to discover and live the good. Heraclitus would say that most men see a duality, see the good and see the evil. But indeed, for God, for goodness, in the universe, all actually is one. there is only the goodness. There is no duality. There is only the harmony of the oneness. It only appears as a duality, but there is the harmony of the oneness. And he so much acknowledged the oneness of that goodness that in his mind, in his way, in his attitude, in his philosophy, evil was actually only another aspect of the good, a temporary aspect of the good, a temporary limitation which is necessary in the whole harmony, in the whole beauty of life. So for Heraclitus, really living the good life meant living in harmony with a universal principle and universal laws. And Democritus, another great philosopher that we mentioned, also would say it is not enough for man to actually do good works, but we must go beyond that and actually see the motive and the desire of a man who does good works. And he would say he is a good man who always thinks, desires, and wills that he will do good works. Not only one who does good works, perhaps for some selfish reason, perhaps for some selfish motive, perhaps to serve some particular secular or some fragment of what he believed in. For Democritus was a man who believed that he is good who does good for the whole, and not he who does good only for the part, whether the part is the major part or whether the part is the smaller part. And so this philosophy of holistic appreciation of what is good, of holistic appreciation of how and what a man would have to do to be good, pervaded all of the early philosophers. As an example, for Socrates, the good was a deep search to find the highest good, to find a way by which always men will do what is good. He said that man is not evil by nature. Man only may do evil things by virtue of ignorance. Therefore, he would say the highest good is spiritual knowledge. The highest good is knowledge by which constantly we endeavor to refine and constantly we endeavor to advocate that we must go deeper and deeper into its essence. Certainly, he was a man of humility, for when they gave him the great title of the wisest man on earth, he was very perplexed. He would not accept it, and he thought and meditated over it for a very long period of time. And then he said, aha, it must be because I know that I don't know. And indeed that demonstrates the beauty of humility and the essential motive which these great men had inspiring their minds, their attitudes, and their way of life. They constantly searched to find more of that infinite. They were not prepared to settle. They were not prepared to actually limit themselves in the first particular aspect of the beautiful or the good they came to understand. For Plato, the good was something even deeper. He actually appreciated and understood what Socrates said, and he took that on board. And indeed, he understood that knowledge is essential if we are to actually manifest the good. We must know what is good to do good. Because if we do not know, then certainly we might actually in our ignorance act in evil ways. But he said that in man, that which is of kind, with a universal reason and harmony, then that indeed would be the highest good. And only when that actually governed man, then his works will actually be good. For he said that man is triple in his nature. He has physical appetites and desires. He certainly has intellectual thoughts and ideas. And he also has a will. And it is only when reason actually guides the will and reason ensures and controls the physical appetites, then a man will act and express good works. Because if his physical appetites control him, and then clearly he may actually act in ways that are not beautifying, in ways that are not good for the whole. But if reason controls the physical appetites and also guides the will, then his actions will be empowered by the will and his actions will also be in harmony with the divine reason that governs the universe. Plato understood that there were actual real principles and laws that governed all and everything. And he said that reason is the very aspect of man that actually differentiates him from any other living form that he would observe. And therefore, the highest good for Plato was the harmonization of man's reason with divine reason. Aristotle, after him, agreed with all of these matters, but then he also had something unique of its own kind, which was beautiful and of value to say. He said that we always do things to attain something, to get something. And when we get something, then we get it so that we can get something else. And everything, he said, creates a kind of a chain reaction. All things endeavor to attain their ultimate possibility. And in the attainment of their ultimate possibility, that he would call good. So for Aristotle, the good was the realization of the potential. And as he said, all things are different, then for each thing, the good was the realization of its particular kind of potential. Does that make sense? It's a very beautiful philosophy. Because if that is the case, then we will not kick a dog because the dog did not actually know that it was a wet concrete upon which it actually walked on. We would actually understand that perhaps for the dog's intelligence, it cannot read the message that you have put wet concrete. But how often do we end up or find ourselves behaving in such a ways where we do not appreciate the actual potential of another living thing? We do not appreciate that each living thing has a different potential which it seeks to realize. So for Aristotle, the realization of the potential of any living thing was the manifestation of the good. And therefore, when we come to synthesize, when Plotinus comes to synthesize about the good, he says that indeed the good is the means by which the whole universe is sustained, is the means by which the whole universe is actually created, is the means by which the whole universe will attain its potential fulfillment. And therefore, certainly, it is the same for anyone who seeks to realize what is the good. He must come to appreciate that within him are the faculties by which he can come to know the beauty of goodness and express the beauty of goodness. But no matter whether we talk of those names that I have already mentioned, who advocated that we must harmonize ourselves with the universal principles, or those who are known as the sophists, who went completely in the opposite direction and said that there are no moral principles, there are no principles of goodness, every man for himself. Every man must actually act in accordance with his own individual appreciation of life. Even in their attitude, still they advocated that for the benefit of actually breaking down some of the belief systems and causing the individual man to realize for himself, to think for himself, to understand for himself. But when this inner motive for what they had said was taken away from their philosophy, then those who actually advocated their philosophy chaos, because if every man is for himself and there are no actual moral principles by which we live our lives, then certainly we create chaos, and some of that perhaps we see in our daily lives today. It is essential to see that in the contrast between the individual and the contrast between the group activity, in the contrast between those earlier philosophers that understood that there were principles of life and those who advocated that each man must live in accordance with what he appreciated to be good, there is a certain sense of the above and the below, a certain sense of the inner and the outer. And indeed, when we synthesize the outer and the inner, the phenomenal and the noumenal, the above and the below, it is only then that we have a holistic philosophy. And certainly the message from the Greek philosophers was that we must appreciate the whole and not only the fragment. If we say a few things about the true, for indeed time is pressing on, and as I have said, it is impossible that we can ever manage to condense in one little diamond the whole mystery of 1,000 years. The ancient Greeks asked, what is truth? They asked, is truth something that a man is born with, or is something that he will attain? Is truth something that one can get to through the senses? Or is truth something that actually is not to be appreciated, cannot be understood, cannot be comprehended by the senses? Is truth something that really is eternal, or is it something that is temporary? And all of these questions troubled the minds of the early Greek philosophers. Certainly, Socrates has developed a whole system so much. His life was taken by endeavoring to find a system by which the truth can be known, that he actually developed a perfect system, which was the very reason why he was actually given the poison in the end. He developed a system by which he will challenge the thoughts and beliefs always of what others had to say, not for the purpose of simply challenging them, but for the purpose of clearing away all the dead wood, for the purpose of clearing away all that did not make sense, all that was not real. And then he would actually take what was left and through it endeavor to penetrate deeply by applying his keen mind and come to identify a broad principle by which subsequently other things can be explained and which can act as a foundation for further inquiries. So his whole approach to a subject matter has become actually a well-known method, the Socratic method, which some recent teachers also used, one of which is our Krishnamurti. This Socratic method is a very, very useful one, and certainly many of the initiates of the world and the mystics and the advanced occultists always would use this method of starting from the universal and then moving slowly to the particular. Whereas our current scientists start from the particular and then endeavor at some point later to find the universal. But indeed, they often end up making the mistake of actually trying to find ways of justifying their thesis. And their thesis actually may be a theory that is unfounded in the first place, because they have started from the particular, they have not started from a universal principle of truth. And so it is essential to come to realize these universal principles. For the Greeks, these were the foundations, these universal principles which they called laws, the laws of nature. The early Greek philosophers were called by Aristotle the physici, and they were called the physici because they studied physis, and physis is nature. Nature, not only going out and studying botany and studying the plants and flowers and animals, but actually studying the very means by which nature lives, the very means by which the whole cycle of birth and death works, the whole nature of what makes birth, what makes death, what actually is the here and after, and all that pertains to the current sciences that we have today. The Greek philosophers deeply interest themselves with these subject matters of the natural phenomena and all that was beyond the phenomena, that was the essence that caused the phenomena. This is something that Aristotle would actually advocate constantly, that we must find the cause of things, not only look at things in themselves, but find the causes, because in the causes is the life. In the causes is the vibrancy, the source, the living water that quenches the thirst for spiritual knowledge. Spiritual knowledge indeed is the very essence which makes people happy. And happiness is an essential part of life, we have said. So truth for the ancient Greeks was a means of and a way of life, not only something that they academically studied. Truth for the Greeks was a mystery to be discovered each and every day. Not something that we actually learn, put in our heads, and then forget about it. It was something that was discovered each and every day afresh. Certainly they would advocate that it is not possible that we can actually appreciate the mystery of truth through the senses. For the senses completely and utterly gives us a false reflection. Through the senses, as an example of the eyes that see, we do not actually see the real. We only see an image. And as Plotinus has already told us, if we actually stay with the image and we focus our attention upon the image, then it would be like allowing our soul to delve in the darkness and converse with the shadows, the reflections, not the real. And so it is essential to understand that Plato states that actually truth is a realm, is a state of beingness. It is not something that you can take hold of. It is not something that you can possess in that respect. It is something that you enter within its realm. And he would also state that truth is a reminiscence. This is the famous statement that actually the soul of man comes with that realm of truth. And it is only when we withdraw within that realm of the spiritual soul that we are able to perceive truth as is and not as it appears to be through our senses. And Plato was a great advocate of always withdrawing from the outer phenomenal life into the inner, the noumenal, the world of ideas, the archetypal world, as he would call it. And it is in that archetypal world that truth is like a pool of wisdom in which we may enter. But the entering of it is a long and arduous journey. Certain of the other philosophers, like the Epicureans, said that really the way of knowing truth is to rely upon the senses. And to rely upon the senses, we all know if we seek truth through the senses, we can only appreciate the image, for the senses can only know the image. So there was a conflict between those that acknowledged that truth is a state of beingness and those who acknowledge that truth is something that you actually come to know through your senses or your thoughts or the way that you use those senses. It is essential to see that in that contrast, once again, in that difference between those who advocated that truth is in latency already in a state of beingness, and the outer experience only served to actually awaken that truth from latency into potency. And these were the Pythagoreans, the Platos, Aristotles, and so on. But there were other philosophers that said, no, that can't be true. It is only when man uses his senses that he comes to actually know. And of course, when we focus our attention only on the senses, we hear the statements that if I see it, then I will believe it. If I hear it with my own ears and see it with my own eyes, then I will believe it. And how many things have we seen with our own eyes and subsequently discovered that there were only miasms, there were only things that were not real? The rope that becomes the snake, or the branch that wavers in the wind, that we think there is somebody following us and somebody who is predatory after us. It is essential to see that all our senses are only limited in what they can bring to us. They have been called by others as the tax gatherers, who bring information and bring fruits, but it is only when the king, he who is within, is able to actually awaken within him that which can perceive the likeness of truth. It is only possible when we make ourselves like truth, that we are true in ourselves, that we can know truth. One of the great philosophers states that man within him has the elements of all the universe. And by virtue of that fact, it is possible that he can know the truth in the universe. But only when he discovers or in his consciousness realizes that element within himself that can know the truth. It is within him, but until he is it, until he consciously is at one man with it, then truth forever will recede away from him. And it is essential to realize that this message about the truth, about the good, about the beautiful, it is a very important message for here today, for our lives and our ways of relating with one another, for our ways of relating with our constitution, for our ways of relating with who we are, what we are, and where our ultimate goal is. And I hope that truth, the good and the beautiful, becomes for us an ongoing, essential discovery, not only because within it lies the ultimate liberation from man, from ignorance, from separateness, from all the misery and pain that we experience each and every day in our lives, but also because to beautify the world, it is our duty. It is the duty of man. It is said by the ancient Greek philosophers to live, breathe, and have his being in this universe, and all the days of his life to beautify and to do good works, and to live a life that will be an example, that will be something that others will have and know as a hero, as one to emulate. I ask ourselves once again, who do we have as our heroes? What are the qualities that we endeavor to manifest in our everyday lives? How do we endeavor to resolve the great problems that our humanity is faced with? There are many serious problems that face each and every one of us, and we are as responsible for them as the world out there. For we are the world out there, each and every one of us. And therefore it is essential that we apply our all to resolve the conflicts and to understand the problems that face humanity, for we are humanity. Humanity is a term that actually very often makes it easy for us to escape our responsibility. But it is essential that we realize that we as individuals make that humanity, and therefore we as individuals are responsible for all that lives in that humanity, and are responsible for the liberation of that humanity. And so essentially, the ancient Greeks synthesized and unified knowledge in three great systems or brackets. One that pertains to the divine, one that pertains to man, and one that pertains to the universe or cosmos. And they saw also that all knowledge, no matter of what order, of what kind, would fall under one or other of these brackets, or if we were to look at more closely, we would say that the divine has three principles. One, the absolute ineffable unity of all life. Two, the divine trinity of those principles that we know as the abiding, the proceeding, and the returning, or in theosophical terms, the will, the love, wisdom, and the creative activity. Or in other terms, the energizing principle, the unifying principle, and the differentiating principle. The second aspect of the divine is the emanations, the great emanations which we call as powers, as archangels, angels, or divas. And so altogether, we have the oneness of life, the one absolute ineffable, we have the triplicity of that ineffable, the three great attributes of it, which we called the abiding, proceeding, and returning, and we have the multiplicity of emanations. And in man, we have his spiritual nature, his spirituality, or his individuality, and his personality. And we, in the cosmos, have the noumenal world, the invisible world, or the phenomenal world, the visible world, and the relationship between those two worlds that pervade them both. And therefore, if we see, in that respect, that all knowledge would fall, whatever its kind, under one or those of those mantles, or those great systems by which we can inquire. And it is essentially that which the Neoplatonists gave to us as a gift. For they synthesized the teachings of the ancient Greeks, philosophers, and in their writings we will find great theses upon the subject matter of the divine, upon man, and upon the cosmos. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope that at least I have perhaps touched in you the desire and the interest to seek and find a little more about the beauty, about the good, and about the true of the Greek philosophy. For it is not only in the ancient India or in ancient Egypt or in ancient Rome or in any of the other ancient cultures that the truth was revealed. But also here in the Western world, we have easily accessible material in which we may discover and have inspiration and so on. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I'm very happy to respond to them, but how would you wish to proceed?
Well, that's been an excellent lecture, Yiannis. I'm sure all of us would agree. And if you could join me in the traditional way.
Thank you.
He had notes, but not once did he look at them. And I think that in itself is really quite a feat. 60 minutes non-stop. He obviously takes breathing techniques. Now, do you have any questions from the floor any of you would like to put? First, could I ask for questions, and later, if we have time, for comments? I think you're the first.
You said the Greeks were very good at synthesis. I find it difficult to understand this point you were making under the heading of truth, that they were in two schools of thought.
Yeah.
Because surely, well, it's really two sides of the same coin, isn't it? You've got to use your senses to gather information, as you said yourself, before you've got enough information to construct some sort of theory or some sort of hypothesis.
Yes.
So, I mean, why was there a division between them? Couldn't they see the synthesis of this?
Well, the synthesis came later when the Neoplatonists, as I said, like Plotinus, Porphyr, and Philo, and so on, would actually reflect upon all the teachings that were discovered by the ancient philosophers and then make commentaries over them and see the synthesis. But each philosopher, when he was working in his own way to discover the truth, he came to actually predominantly focus his attention either on the outer life, which is attained through or seen or experienced through the actual senses, or as Plato, who was a great initiate, through the realization that truth is a state of being for the soul, and therefore the outer experiences and all that he came to know through his senses only served to actually stimulate and awaken that inner realization. So the contrast is in that those that advocated that you get truth through the senses focused their attention on that, and they denied the fact that there was an existence of a state of being and a state of knowing and a state of truth, a pool of wisdom, if I may call it so. Whereas Plato recognized this world of archetypal ideas, and because of that, he said that it was a reminiscence, for there had to be something in man that is at one with it. Else, what would ever bridge the gap? If there was something not in man already, then will always be the truth out there, him over here, and then there was a great gap in between. What would ever bridge that gap? Nothing could ever bridge that gap. So for Plato, experience was not that which actually attained truth. Experience was only that which awakened truth in man. And that was the difference, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of the Greek myths, like most of Leth and the reincarnation ideas embodied in that, seem to be very beautiful and reflect a lot of the truth. Now, did those myths originate before these philosophers or after them?
Most of them originated before those philosophers. You see, the Greece that we know, I have only just covered very briefly 1,000 years, a millennia, yes? But the Greeks were in that divine land for many, many thousands of years. Before those philosophers, there were the great Orphic years and the mysteries of Orpheus. Now, Orpheus was somewhat 10,000 years before those Greeks that I'm actually talking about, yes? 7 to 10,000 years before. And then before them, there was the Pelasgian Greeks, which were 25,000 years back in history. So, although such things I cannot substantiate with facts and figures, certainly in many areas of esoteric philosophy there are hints to be found, certainly in the Blavatsky writings and in the Secret Doctrine and other religious and philosophical writings make hints in respect of that. So yes, indeed, all that mythology was nothing else other than a current art in which they embodied and veiled truth in such a way that it will remain for posterity, because we all love to hear stories. And storytelling was a divine art that they knew and they used very well. For in the very, very olden times, there were no publishing houses to print easy books like the ones that you see before you. Things had to actually be able to be remembered and to be passed through oratory, through mouth to mouth, so to speak, easily and be comprehended. And mythology was one of the most unique systems by which that conveyance of truth from generation to generation was done. And certainly the Hercules, 12 tasks, and the mythology associated with that, and the Orphic mysteries, and all of these are steeped and deeply involved with the great truths of life and the mysteries of life, which were taught in the Eleusinian mysteries later on. Yeah? Thank you.
Have we any more questions? Yes, sir.
Can you say something about Atlantis and the lost continent? And,
Mm-hmm.
is there any connection? Can you say anything about the possible connection there?
Yes, I think that he, being an initiate, was certainly a man who was able to have a vision and read the great libraries of the world, not only from the standpoint of using his physical senses, as we said, because he was the great advocate, as I mentioned earlier, that truth is a state to which one can enter if one withdraws from the senses and withdraws into that very essential being of himself through which he may perceive and see truth as is. And therefore, with that, the hint is that he was able to read, perhaps, the great library of the world, which we know as the Akashic Records. And therefore, he was able to see within it the much longer and greater history of life upon this planet and the advanced civilizations that had been before him. And so he mentioned briefly the actual Atlantis and all that pertained to that island. But philosophers of the later times suggested that really he only heard that from one of his teachers and from the Egyptians and so on. But the understanding that I have of the state and level of that man in his accomplishment as an initiate was such that an initiate of the 3rd degree and the 4th degree, as it is known, definitely is a being who has access to many of the mysteries that are recorded in the Akashic Records. And so his knowledge of Atlantis was not only because somebody mentioned it to him, but I would rather suggest that it was something that he knew as a fact from observation and understanding of his inner faculties, his inner vision through which he was able to observe it. Yes? That's what I would say. Yeah.
Yes.
Nowadays, there seems to be a problem with the perception of what is beautiful. I wonder, did the Greeks, ancient Greek philosophers, talk about the cultivation of the appreciation of beauty within the individual? Because I think you spoke quite a lot about the beauty out there, as it were, which seemed to be immediately perceptible to them. But plainly, that is not the case nowadays. What did they have? Were there methods for cultivating the appreciation of the beautiful? I mean, were there people in those days who couldn't appreciate a beautiful statue, even though it was generally accepted as beautiful? You see what I mean?
Yes, sure.
I'd like you could comment on this.
Yeah, I certainly think that there were, because if you look at the great art of Greece, if you look at Parthenon as an example, you'll see that certainly they had a way of appreciating beauty and had the knowledge of mathematics and the way of vision and the way to look to make these columns, which are indeed columns of not a straight shape. There are bends and curves in them, yet when you look at them and I look at them, we see them absolutely beautiful without any bends, because of them being able to appreciate how to take account of the light and the reflection of the light and the whole nature of that. So indeed there was a way, and there was teachings involved in the way to use the faculties to appreciate the beauty in nature, as well as the cultivation of beauty in oneself, which I mentioned in respect of the refinement of the character, and the way that one must withdraw from the outer form, and the way that one must cut away all the unnecessary, straighten all the crooked, just like the sculptor does when he actually creates a beautiful statue. But these were taught more in the schools, which were greatly advocating the whole nature of education, the holistic nature of education, the intellectual, the moral, as well as the physical and volitional nature. And so indeed there was the means by which to cultivate the way to appreciate beauty.
Right. Do we have any more questions or comments on the floor? Right. Well, of course, you can all speak to Yiannis later if you would like to privately discuss tonight's talk and some questions you might have. I have some announcements to give you, but before I do that, I'd like to thank Yiannis from the bottom of my heart for a brilliant presentation this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.